You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk, a regular podcast we do with leaders in the biohealth industry in the BioHealth Capital Region, nationally or internationally. And we have a frequent visitor to BioTalk and to the BioHealth Capital Region, who's beginning to learn a lot more about what we're doing here based on how he follows the top regions around the United States on a regular basis. So we have Alex Philippidis, Senior News Editor for Genetic, Engineering and Biotechnology News, who's joining us for a repeat performance on BioTalk today. Alex, welcome again.
Hi, welcome back, Rich, or should I say, howdy again.
Yes, you've got your BioTalk mug. Thank you. I had mine earlier, but I finished my tea. So it's afternoon. I'm drinking just plain old Poland spring water right now, Alex. And I see, broadcasting from home, I see you're in the Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News headquarters building, but you look like you're alone, Alex.
Well, actually, there's another one or two employees over here for now. Over time, that will ramp up. There's not been a formal decision or date set for reopening, but that's expected in the summer. Again, so long as the present trends of fewer cases, fewer people sick continue in our area.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't know that the headquarters for Gen publication and many other publications is in New Rochelle, New York. And New Rochelle, New York became very famous during our COVID-19 pandemic. So, Alex, talk a little bit about what you went through, because you were sort of the hot spot for America for a while.
The offices of Jen and Marianne Liebert Inc., that's the parent company, are in New Rochelle, a mile and a half from what was the first containment zone when the first cases of COVID-19 popped up in the New York metro area in New Rochelle. Since then, I should say as of June 15th, which is the latest number posted on the City of New Rochelle's website, 2,992 cases have been, which is roughly a little under 10% of the total. It's 34,000 change at last count within Westchester County. And it's basically, as with most of the country and even a lot of the world, it's appended life. And since the 12th of March, we at Jen and Liebert have been working from home with, exceptions here and there. Remember, our area, Westchester, is now in phase 3 of the planned 4-phase recovery as of today. So in phase 3, you have some indoor dining with reduced capacity, as well as the outdoor dining, as well as takeouts and deliveries for the restaurants. I'd say that's the biggest change, although you also have in phase 3 spas and tattoo places and gyms now can resume operation.
Yeah, it sounds like the spas and the tanning salons are things that you and I go to on a weekly basis.
Well,
but there are some people that need that, and
some people want it too. So
and they want it.
To each their own.
Good for them. To each their own. So at the end of the day, though, I got to know you because you put together an annual ranking of the top biopharma clusters in the United States, and have been doing this for how many years now, Alex?
Stretching back to 2014 with the cluster. It's an annual ranking. We look at 5 criteria: NIH funding, patents, we look at the amount of lab space, we look at venture capital funding, and we look at numbers of jobs. And from those, attempt to basically the numbers tell the story. The interesting thing is that the same 10 regions have been in the ranking stretching back to 2014, although the order for many of them has been different. The first time we did this, San Francisco Bay Area was tops in the nation, although for the last roughly 5 years, it's been Massachusetts, like Boston and Cambridge primarily. And within, you've seen New York City and the BioHealth Capital Region advance in that time. You've seen other regions sort of step back and start to bounce back. Seattle comes to mind when I say that, because they lost a regional anchor in Amgen, but they've come back and nurtured some homegrown companies like Juno Therapeutics, which got bought up by Celgene, which got bought up by Bristol Myers Squibb. That's the story of biotech. And more recently, Silverback Therapeutics with 87 million plus in financing recently raised, and Adaptive Bio scoring a collaboration with Microsoft. Again, homegrown companies coming together.
Yeah, so it's not one indicator that really shifts the clusters from one ranking to another. It's a factors. And I think we're pleased to say that probably over the last 6 years, we've gone from number 6 and up to number 4. And the other thing is, thanks to you, you also recognize that we branded ourselves differently and making it the BioHealth Capital Region rather than the old 270 corridor, which was sort of a 5-mile stretch located in Maryland where a lot of the biotech companies are. But really, we've become more of a regional cluster than just a 5-mile cluster as it was originally depicted.
I mean, that area was thought of entirely and still thought of a lot as being Montgomery County, Maryland. And there's, again, Gaithersburg, I believe Germantown's in the county
Rockville,
as well.
Germantown.
So there has been a concentration of biotech, not only academic, but especially companies there, and companies that were homegrown and became national. I think of HGS, for example, Human Genome. I think of MedImmune, which got bought up by AstraZeneca when I look at those. And you see that today in the region.
So, I mean, the changes are still occurring. And one of the things that we feel very bullish is that the venture capital financings are growing in size, as well as M&A activity, which generally what happens when a big large bio or pharma company buys in a smaller one is they generally try to move everybody out of the area and consolidate into the region where they're located. But what we're finding here is because of the talent and the clustering effect of what's happening in our region, we're not seeing a lot of the acquisitions and our companies disappearing. Actually, in effect, they're growing, and other companies like Kite and Autolus are coming into our region, which is also an encouraging sign.
Yeah, for Autolus, especially because they're based out of England. And also the fact that AstraZeneca stayed and grew in the area.
Definitely.
Gaithersburg.
One of the things that's very nice that you've done is you've been able to visit our region and speak at our annual BioHealth Forum. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we weren't able to do that this year. We're going to make it virtual in October. You might be able to make a reappearance. Oh, you've got your badge with you. That's great. As a presenter, he's got his presenter badge from the 5th annual BioHealth. No, the 5th annual BioHealth Capital.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the 6th is going to be virtual on October 19th. We're combining an investor conference we do with JP Morgan and Wilson Sonsini, which will be October 20th. It might be good because it really will be a year and a half rather than a year. It might be good for you to do a little burns for us this year if you're willing.
I accept your invitation.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. But
I don't accept the travel this time.
People like your national perspective because sort of what's going on in the top 10 emerging markets and the growth that's occurring there.
Well, we came close in the current issue of Print Gen magazine. Gen has a print magazine as well as the website with all these news and feature and perspective articles. We have an article which I wrote called In Praise of Lesser Sung Life Science Clusters. And what that is it's not a ranking like the lists that you've seen through the years for the clusters. It's an opportunity to highlight both basically clusters that are not Boston, Cambridge, or San Francisco Bay Area. And so we looked at a mix of clusters we have featured in the past, like BioHealth Capital Region, like San Diego, like Seattle, as well as some up-and-comers, regions we've never really written about in the past, like Houston, for example, the home of MD Anderson and Baylor College of Medicine, some world-class institutions. We did include Minnesota, or they call it Medical Alley, because of the presence of the Mayo Clinic and its determination over the last year to look beyond patient care into using data-driven medicine. They've hired a fellow, let me get the name if I can for you, but here we go, John Halumka. And he was hired back in December as president of Mayo Clinic Platform. And that's a strategic initiative of the Mayo Clinic aimed at improving healthcare through clinical data. So Minnesota has a more expansive, it's not strictly biopharma, but they do more with clinical data as a result. And they have some biopharma.
And they have Medtronic up there too.
Sure, medical
Medtronic
device.
and medical devices, one of the leaders in the world.
Strong. But also we looked at Atlanta, the home of the CDC and the American Cancer Society, and Emory University. So they have, as well as Metro Denver. We've seen Avexis, for example, move into Longmont, for example. Avexis now part of Novartis. It's a gene therapy developer.
So what are the major trends you're seeing in the biopharma, biohealth industry in the last year? We're going to get into COVID-19 and the pandemic very specifically and in detail in a second. But other than the pandemic and COVID-19, what other trends are you seeing emerging within our industry?
One thing I saw was it was still strong financing activity. Even if last year may not have technically been a record, there were a lot of strong and big money financings, especially in earlier rounds. So you have investors now, once they're sold on a technology, wanting to get in on it earlier. That's one thing. Also, seeing in the region where regions looking at varieties of technology. They want to have their hands in not only on traditional drug and vaccine development, but more cell and gene therapy, more even clinical research institutions, because they're going to need hospitals and places like that to do trials for new treatments. So you're seeing, and Minnesota's the example I kind of harped on, but there are regions that are looking more broadly in defining life sciences. I mean, I know 13 years ago, when I was writing on life science economic development for Genome Web, we looked at life sci as not only biopharma, but medical device. So, for example, when we covered Minnesota, it would be medical device. And again, that's not a specialty or focus necessarily of GWeb, but it was for life sci purposes. But now you're looking at more expansive type of activity. And that in turn, it does address one of the long-standing challenges of the drug and vaccine developers, which is getting their stuff tested to make sure it's safe and effective. Also, looking at more of a focus on cohesion in regions that have advanced in the last 5 or 6 years. When I say cohesion, not only your basic academic industry collabs here and there, but also a sense by organizations like BHCR, like NYC Builds Bio in New York City, and I'm doing a Zoom cast. I'll be among the speakers there on Monday that they're presenting, along with leaders from the San Diego and Seattle communities, Joe Panetta, for example, Leslie Alexander in Seattle. And what you see, one thing those two regions have, and I'll add this as an insight, is that they have leadership with experience. And these are folks who know how to build communities where they can bring stakeholders together, not only the companies and the academics, but if necessary, people in economic development agencies and government, certainly the financing folks too, because they're so needed for these companies.
When you do your thing with New York next week, you can BioHealth Capital Region's coming after them because they're number 3. And our goal is to be a top 3 by 2023. So just tell them to watch out, Alex, when you're on your podcast with them, okay?
Well, all right. But they've shown some progress in the last few years, too. And it's not, again, I think a lot of it's because New York City woke up starting in the last 15 years under Mayor Michael Bloomberg, with Bill de Blasio continuing at least some more of those policies to get industry growing. And also Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, and in New Jersey, now Phil Murphy, continuing. He won some recognition from Bio last year as a governor of the year. So in a region as big as New York, New Jersey, cohesion is a major challenge.
One of the common elements between New York, New Jersey, and BioHealth Capital Region in Maryland is Alexandria Real Estate Equities with Joe Marcus and the leadership he's shown because of the campus he's developing down there on the East River and actually doubling in size. And also what comes with that is, of course, they're one of the most active life science venture capital investors in addition to being a real estate developer. So we notice that he is helping both of our regions grow based on the commitment they're making financially as well as commercially.
And he was an early believer in New York City with what was now the Alexandria Center for Life Sciences in New York, and has grown in the BioHealth Capital Region and a whole bunch of other regions. I mean, they're in the
Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, Boston, Research Triangle. They're in the top 7 markets. So glad to have them as a partner. As a matter of fact, they're going to be the lead investor in our BioHealth Capital Fund, a $50 million fund. But that's enough about us. I could talk about us forever. I want to talk a little bit about you guys monitoring what's been going on with the COVID-19, with the pandemic, all the people who've been active in that, and the trends that are occurring. So give me your perception of what's happened and transformed in the last 90 days based on the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all encountering here in the United States and around the world.
Well, there's been a lot of back and forth about how fast, if it was fast at all, maybe not as much, governments have acted. The industry's taken a different tack. Stretching back to March, you've had really a scramble, more than, well, by my count, about 250 plus either companies, partnerships looking to develop treatments for COVID-19. And the pace of that activity has been incredibly quick. Things that took traditionally several years have been done in a matter of months. When I say that, I mean going from early lab tests into in vitro, into getting into the clinic. You've had vaccines at last count, which was in the middle of the month. 10 vaccines had reached clinical trials. Again, some names becoming very familiar to even folks who don't read the trade news like Jen. You think of Moderna with mRNA 1273. You think of, Gilead Sciences with remdesivir. And then most recently, this morning, Sanofi expanding its 2-year-old collaboration with Translate Bio for mRNA vaccines. They're going from 5 to 7 targets. They're formally now including the COVID-19 vaccine in that expanded partnership, and that's gone from $800 million to potentially $2.3 billion with a B dollars plus for Translate Bio. Again, Lexington, Mass. But actually, I'd spoken with CEO Ron Renaud back in May, and he offered kind of a progress update, and we included some notes from that talk in today's write-up in Jen. But that's an example of how quickly they're looking at actually starting clinical trials by the end of this year. And we have, as early as this fall, we're going to be seeing phase 3 trials with some of the others. AstraZeneca, which glommed onto the University of Oxford vaccine, a good example of one of the real fast movers among the vaccine candidates.
Yeah, and we're happy about that because that really hasn't been their strength, but they realize that's something where they could really make a difference. Since we have AZ in our backyard with 5,000 people, we're partner with a number of different people, just like the other biopharma companies, realizing they need to look at people that have active or testing clinical trial capabilities, but finding partnerships to way to accelerate the development of these vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics.
One company in the BioHealth Capital Region, I should point out, is Emergent Biosolutions, because they're involved in several of the vaccine
partnerships.
Yeah, a lot of partnerships. I think AstraZeneca is one of them, and they've been involved in a few.
Novavax is another one,
Novavax
which has been hot
in the region. They launched their clinical trial for the vaccine in Australia. You talk about the global nature of this work. Unfortunately, the centers that have been the real hotbeds of cases, China and now the U.S., have been the hotbeds of drug and vaccine activity in COVID-19. So, I mean, if there's one good thing to say that have come out of that. But the activity is global in scope. You've seen the European Union build and then expand a fund toward COVID-19 research. You've seen activity in Australia with Novavax's trials, with CSL Behring and its interest in convalescent plasma as a potential treatment. We'll have to wait and see how that goes.
Yeah, I think also one of the things, sometimes we can be critical of government based on whether they were slow or fast to respond. But if you look at the amount of government funding that's going to accelerate the development of these vaccines and the therapeutics right now, it is amazing because when you say B, there's a number of billion-dollar investments that have been made by government and BARDA, or as you say, the European Union, going into these companies and to place many bets. And this is the way a venture capitalist would do it. You can't just bet in one company. Generally, you're going to place bets on 3 or 4 companies. You mentioned there's 9 or 10 companies right now that are all sort of in a horse race. And then I just saw an article in the Washington Post last week, And their article was, we don't care who wins. Everybody needs to work together. We just need to have multiple wins so that we can get multiple vaccines into the marketplace and get more people vaccinated more quickly.
The industry has acknowledged, I think, many of the leaders, as well as even among regulators. Anthony Fauci of NIAID, for example, have said there's going to be several candidates emerging. Of course, the challenge for them will be squaring away how much they're going to charge and how to distribute the vaccine. That's why you've seen a lot of activity toward manufacturing ramp up. You mentioned BARDA, for example. AstraZeneca is getting $1.2 billion from BARDA alone. And there are several,
with their Oxford partnership, yeah.
Right. And their partner with their BARDA announcements in the hundreds of millions of dollars with several other.
I think Emergent had 600 to 800 million from BARDA that they were getting.
Yes. I can check the exact amount, but it was 600 and change.
Yeah, 600 and change. That's real numbers.
For sure. And what's the phrase they use in the industry? Multiple shots on goal.
Multiple shots on goal. And I guess that's what we're doing right now. And a lot of times, and you follow this trends in the pharma and the life science industry for years, sometimes people look negatively based on the way people are charging for drug prices, and the pharmaceutical industry had somewhat of a negative connotation or perception. But if you look at right now how it can be also a savior for reducing the number of deaths and the indications for the number of new cases that would emerge, sometimes the other side of the pharma industry comes out as well, where it can be the good guy.
It'll remain to be seen ultimately how much gets charged for these drugs and vaccines and how that's going to be paid for. How much are payers going to be willing to stomach, for example? How much will the companies be willing to offer some sort of lower cost? And there's been some discussion, for example, with remdesivir. Should that be 4,000, of course, 5,000, 10,000, depending on the estimates is where the analysts have come up with their projections for how much in billions a drug like that could make. I think that remains to be seen, but that's a potential challenge. It's certainly not the speed of R&D development from the companies, and you could argue it's not the activity of regulators, because regulators have been more than willing to give quicker than standard approvals, given the urgency of the need to find drugs and vaccines for COVID-19.
Well, that's one of the things that's impressed me, because the FDA generally has had a bad rap because of how slow it is to get things into the marketplace. But I think their accelerated regulatory approvals at different phases right now goes to speak what could be done in the future when we're done with this pandemic. I don't know if we'll ever be done. But at the end of the day, some of these approval processes we're going through for COVID-19 may be able to be applied to different therapeutic areas or diagnostic areas or medical device areas in the future. And hopefully it can streamline the regulatory process.
I think it will, but I think it's going to depend by indication in terms of how quickly the agency is going to go. And also, we'll have to see that there hasn't been some misstep as a result of the speedy type of review and approval. That still remains to be seen.
We've been talking about the big companies, but you mentioned 250 companies that you guys are tracking that are involved, whether it be a diagnostic, a vaccine, a therapeutic, whatever, a biomarker or a tool or something related to COVID-19. Do you see any potential early stars emerging that you're anxious to follow in the future that may not have been visible, but it became visible because of this pandemic?
I mean, no, but I think there could be. I think in 3 to 6 months, I would expect that. And again, we have a 4-step rating, if you will, or ranking. We have front runners, which are some of the obvious names you've seen, like Gilead with remdesivir, like Moderna with its vaccine. Regeneron's antibody cocktail comes to mind like that. Then we have 3 lower steps, definitely maybes, sort of the next step up. Eli Lilly's candidates fall into that. They have collaboration with Abcelera, which we've written about at Gen, for antibodies. And ultimately, Lilly's looking at an antibody cocktail of its own. Lilly has a separate collaboration with Junshi Biosciences for another antibody that could be part of that cocktail. And having Junshi gets them entryway into China, which companies do have to think globally as they go about with their development for COVID-19. Then we have keeping an eye on type candidates. So some of those I'm expecting will move up than those that are just too soon to tell.
So you have 4 categories. Are those public rankings but you have the 4 categories spread out in the publication?
We have those spread out, yeah. The tracker is sort of a website within a website because we have individual pages for each candidate that we track. And what those do is basically summarize announcements and progress of these vaccines through clinical development, financial. Sometimes it follows setbacks. I mean, you think of hydroxychloroquine, for example, which became very public, very controversial. But in the last week, actually, the last 8, 9, well, as of this recording.
As of today.
Yeah, 10 days where it's been setback after setback. The drug lost its FDA emergency use authorization. Then there were trials by the NIH, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, by Novartis, that was a phase 3 trial, and by the World Health Organization. And all 3 were halted. Novartis because they couldn't recruit enough patients, the other 2 because they said, well, efficacy was at issue. So there are sometimes setbacks within the candidates. Also companies as well, as Colectra was an early favorite of AbbVie's. But you saw now AbbVie partnering with Harbor Biomed, and again, looking at antibodies, kind of a different approach. And maybe that's the time they'll fare better.
I think with all of the focus on COVID, people lose sight that there's other elements in the biopharma and the biohealth world that are continuing on, but there isn't much attention being given to them. So what are some of the other trends you're seeing emerging or other hot research or therapy areas outside of the COVID-19 area that you see are going to be hot areas for the future?
I mean, I think you're still seeing a lot of activity in cancer. You're still seeing a lot. Actually, as an offshoot of COVID, you're seeing renewed interest in infectious disease. For a long time, that was sort of poo-pooed. Despite laws like the GAIN Act in 2012, there hasn't been until lately as much of an emphasis by companies that wanted either rare disease or cancer or other areas that were perceived to be of greater financial need and gain for. So I also see, again, there's still continued cell and gene therapy development. There are all bunches of studies and R&D efforts that took place before the pandemic, but a lot of them continued. Not all. I mean, in many cases, companies did have to pivot, but you're seeing there was a new gene therapy. I'll have to call it up if I can. And we wrote about it last week in Gen, and it was...
You have to call it up, and you wrote about it last week, Alec. It sounds... It got my mind here. I can't forget what I ate for breakfast.
Well, it'll come. Oh, boy. Here we go. Yes, Pfizer and Sangamo, which they're developing a gene therapy for hemophilia. And what happened was last week they reported positive results for phase 1/2. And that could be, again, this is a once, I'll look it up, but
that's okay.
But that was an example of some positive research happening in the meantime that you didn't hear as much about. And certainly we know a lot of the readership focus has been on COVID-19 and to another extent, the more traditional big therapy areas like cancer, that's always been of interest. I don't think that's really died.
That's not going to change.
No.
So let me ask you a question just from a person out in the street. And I'm talking to Alex Philippidis, senior news editor for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News. So I have an interesting story that I think is very interesting. You've never heard of me. There's 2 ways for you to get stories. You're going to go out and research something that you want to write about. But do people also contact you? I'm sure you get a lot of press releases and everything else that you might find interesting. How do you select those things which you feel are newsworthy that you're going to write about or will end up in your publication?
I mean, folks do send press releases. They also occasionally do contact me through Twitter at Alex Westchester or on LinkedIn. I notice I get occasional queries from people that way. There's a lot more news than I or even Jen can focus on at a different time. one thing is I have a couple of editors that I'm always in touch with, and I try to gauge for that. Now, for some things where there's a lot of money involved, or if it's something that we've written in the past and we know we're going to follow up, like this Sanofi and Translate Bio collaboration, there I was able to just jump on that this morning when that announcement came. Yesterday, I was able to jump on the clinical trials and the halted trials for hydroxychloroquine. So certainly things that we followed, we should follow through, and so we'll do coverage. If there's something new, again, I remember a company out of Florida called AGTC, which is Gene Therapy Ocular Eye Disorders. And that's a company that's been of some interest. And I've had occasion, they've made the CEO available, where we've spoken and we've done a little bit of occasional writing. Again, with the pandemic, it's really sort of changed a lot of the focus for GEM, although that I think will start to modify a little bit. And I think we'll get back to getting into some of the other disease areas just as the height of the news coverage abates to a point where there's a level of activity, and then well, there's other stuff going on too.
Yeah, other than the remote environments that we're working, I think there's been behavior modification or work modification in the way people work during the days. And a lot of people have had to change their business model. Have you noticed that Jen has had to do anything dramatically different in the way that you cover stories, the way you publish, the way you're interacting with people out in the industry today that you wouldn't have done maybe 6 months ago?
We were ramping up toward a lot more visits and seeing people face to face. When I say ramping up, stretching back 4 or 5 years, but it was really starting to take off in the last year or two, where we would attend different conferences, where we would meet up with folks. In my case, attending some of the meetings of stakeholders in the New York area, at least, because, well, hey, it's easy to travel, in addition to events like Bio, which would be in a different city every year. This year, Bio was virtual. So much of the news now is virtual. So you'll see conferences come up, and you could be glued to your Zoom all day if you wanted to. That's one big difference from a few months ago. But in the end, I mean, the news is the news. So it's just the tools and the way we'll go about learning things might change because of the pandemic. Actually, they did. But I would expect that to moderate a little bit, so that maybe we'll still see some virtual events, I think, through the fall. I'm seeing from different groups and organizers, but I hope we can get back to normal next year. I really
hope so
do.
too. You can't really match having the personal interaction. It's really when you get into these environments and you're at a meeting, whether it's coffee or having a cocktail or having a meal or something, you'll find out just as much news there as you will is going to be formally the speakers of the content that's happening. And sometimes some of the stuff that you hear secondhand is just as interesting or more interesting than what you hear that everybody knows about.
I mean, that was one of the joys of going to, whether it was the forum last year or Bio, which was in Philadelphia last year. That was a fun few days. Again, a lot of bouncing around to interviews. Because for me, if I go to a conference, what happens is every PR person in town figures out that you're going there. So you try to use your time to line up several interviews, but you also want to get to some panel discussions and presentations that are more plenary in nature that might have some important information there too. So
sounds like a real newsroom in the background there, Alex.
Well, yeah, the Gen and Liber offices are right next to a fire department, firehouse. So we do have the trucks when they're not out on call. They're testing the system, they're backing them up, they're maintaining them. So when I have to answer the bell, at least the trucks will be ready. So
that's good.
You do hear noise, and we get used to it.
You mentioned Bio. Did you participate in Bio this year?
What I did was I listened in on some of the sessions, but there was one that was focused on COVID-19 that had about 5 or 6 speakers. So I listened to that. I saw the Anthony Fauci fireside chat. So there were selected talks, which, I mean, would be done any the year as well, that you'd hit maybe a talk here, a panel discussion there, in addition to a lot of one-on-one opportunities with this CEO or that chief scientific officer or whoever.
One of the biggest news items was the change in leadership for Bio from Jim Green to Michelle McMurray Heath, one who was a congressman before Jim and from Pennsylvania, and then Michelle McMurray Heath coming from Johnson & Johnson, who was working in public policy in D.C. So what do you think about that change in leadership with Bio?
It was a passing of an era, but it should reinvigorate Bio further, because it will have not only the challenges of continuing the industry ramp up we've seen with COVID-19, but also they live or don't based on how well they can create relationships with lawmakers, with regulators, and the like in Washington. That's why Jim was brought in 15 years ago. He did, by all accounts, a good enough job. So here's the best example of how good a job he did. One of the areas that has seen consistent increases in the last couple of years has been the NIH, and that's been both parties buying into the need for additional funding at a time when, even if President Trump comes out with a first draft of a budget that might show a cut in funding for the agency, you'll see that in the House and Senate, they quickly restore it and add to it. So that's an example. And it's not just Bio. There are other many, many groups for the life science industry that are effective in Washington. You think of pharma and AACR and the like. But it goes to show you that a little bit more respect the industry has gained in the last 15 years. And now that respect is going to be watched very closely by the lawmakers to see, gee, will the industry come up with something quickly enough on COVID-19? Will we see return on investment, so to speak?
Well, I think the key is that there's a lot more focus on the whole industry right now, and everybody's watching. So that can have a positive impact as well as it could have a sideways or negative impact. But let's hope on the positive side, since both of us look at our glasses being half full, correct?
Yeah, I would say.
So I think we've covered a myriad of topics today, which is very good to give a little overview of what's going on within the industry. Any last words you have for the listeners for BioTalk right now?
Gee, I would say thank you first off for those of you who read and follow Jen, for those who keep track of the industry and have an interest and a passion for not only seeing new drugs and treatments, but especially seeing patients get better, because that sort of keeps all of us working.
And so I know that you're very available and accessible to people. So Alex Philippidis, the senior editor for Genetic Engineering News, if someone wants to write to you directly, would you mind giving them your email address?
No issue. It is A Philippidis, that's A-P as in Peter, H-I-L-I, 2 P's as in Peter, I-D as in David, I-S, at genengnews.com, G-E-N-E-N as in Nancy, G-N-E-W-S.com. A Philippidis at genengnews.com, on Twitter at Alex Westchester, and on LinkedIn.
Great. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed catching up with you again, Alex. Hopefully the next time, I don't know if it's going to happen in October. We're going to see each other personally one of these days. But again, I'm going to have an invitation sent out to you so that you can give us an update on what's going on in the biopharma clusters around the United States for our BioHealth Forum virtual conference, October 19th, 2020. So thank you for being on BioTalk.
Thank you, Rich, for having me.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.